The bond was supposed to be sacred, unbreakable. So when she felt the thread she had waited her whole life to complete stretch past her and lock on to another woman's throat, she did not scream. She watched. She watched the man she had loved since childhood
With this
set the collar on someone else
mine,
in front of 1,000
forever
faces,
bound
and
to
understood
Highmore.
that everything she believed had been a lie. Then a voice came out of the dark behind her, low,
The wolf.
cold, the voice of the enemy. Her people had been at war with for 3 generations. He had a proposal, he
Bear
said.
me an heir.
Come with him.
And this war ends
Be his
forever.
instead. And he would make the man who discarded her regret every breath he had left. She should have refused. Every rule she knew screamed it. But dignity had not protected her. Faith had not protected her. And somewhere under the ruin, something ancient began to wake, something with fire in it. The candles should not have burned that bright. Aveline noticed it, the way you notice a thing you have no words for yet. The great hall of Highmore held 1,000 candles that night, set in iron rings that hung from the vaulted ceiling, and every one of them leaned toward her as she passed. The flames bent, just slightly, just enough that a servant frowned and checked for a draft that wasn't there. She told herself it was nothing, because she had told herself a great many things were nothing over the years. The way heat pooled in her palms when she was angry. The way a hearth would flare when she walked in cold from the training yard. 2 nights ago, alone in her chamber, furious at a man she was not yet allowed to be furious at, she had watched the edge of a curtain blacken and curl, and she had blamed a fallen candle, and she had said nothing to anyone. Tonight was not a night for questions like that. Tonight was the claiming moon. She stood near the front of the hall, exactly where she had been told to stand, in a gown of white threaded with silver moonstones, braided cold against her scalp. She looked like a bride already. And why shouldn't she? Everyone in that hall believed the same thing she had believed since before she could walk, that Garrick Vale would place the Luna's collar around her throat before the moon reached its height, and that the long, bleeding history of Highmore would finally settle into something like peace. They had been promised to each other as children. Their fathers arranged it. Their mothers blessed it. Her father had been beta of this pack, the most respected bloodline after the Alpha's own, and when he died, the promise had felt less like a promise and more like a debt the world owed her. 2 years ago, Garrick's father fell in a border skirmish, and Garrick became Alpha at 24, too young, too grief-struck, and she had held him in the dark while he shook. She had thought that was love. She had been so certain it was love that she never once asked him whether it was. She watched him now, moving through the crowd. Tall, broad through the shoulder in the way all Alphas carried themselves. Dark hair falling across his brow. The warm brown of autumn oak. When he smiled at the elders, the whole room seemed to warm with him. He had not smiled at her in months. She had built a small house of reasons for that. The war with Blackthorn. Border councils that ran past midnight. The weight of a crown he never asked for. She lived in that little house of reasons, and she kept it very tidy, and she did not look too closely at the cracks in its walls. "You're shaking," a voice said at her elbow. Linnea. Her sister 19 and soft, where Aveline was sharp, their mother's gentleness poured whole into one daughter, and their father's iron into the other. Linnea's eyes moved over her with a worry too old for her face. "It's cold," Aveline said. "It isn't." "Then I'm nervous." A woman's allowed to be nervous at her own claiming. Linnea took her hand and squeezed it, and did not say what her expression was already saying, which was, "Please let me be wrong about this." Across the hall, Near the western doors, a woman in a gown the color of a fresh wound stood very still and watched Aveline the way a cat watches a bird it has already decided about. Morwenna. She had come to High Moor 6 months ago, daughter of some minor lord from the western provinces, all lowered lashes and soft laughter, and a way of appearing exactly where the Alpha happened to be. Aveline had barely noticed her. That was the truth of it. The part that would shame her most later. She had looked right past the woman 100 times because Aveline had been so busy guarding her house of reasons that she never thought to guard the door. Morwenna smiled at her now. Small, private. The smile of someone watching the last stone slide into place. The drums began. A hush moved through the hall like wind through wheat, and Garrick climbed the steps to the raised platform where the high priestess waited. Ancient, and bent the ceremonial collar cradled in her ruined hands. Delicate silver links meant to rest against Aluna's throat as the visible sign of an invisible bond. Aveline had dreamed of that collar since she was 6 years old. Her heart was so loud, she was sure the wolves nearest her could hear it. "Tonight," the priestess said in a voice like dry leaves, "our Alpha claims his mate." Garrick took the collar. He turned to face the hall. "I have made my choice," he said, and his voice carried clean to the back wall. "A choice that will strengthen this pack and secure its future." Aveline breathed in. This was the moment. She had rehearsed it in her mind 10,000 times. He would say her name, and she would climb the steps, and the collar would settle onto her throat, cool and final, and everything she had waited for would arrive at once. His eyes swept the crowd and landed to her left. "Morwenna Sael," he said, "step forward." The word came apart in her hands before she could hold it. No. He had said her name. He must have said her name. She replayed the 2 syllables, and they refused to be hers. And still some stubborn animal part of her insisted there had been a mistake, that in a moment he would look at her and laugh and say your name, of course, your name. Except a woman was already moving. Tall, golden, the wound-red gown pouring down the steps like something spilled. Morwenna climbed toward Garrick with a smile that was no longer private at all, and Aveline stood rooted in her white dress and understood in the slow, terrible way you understand a fall while you are still falling, that this was not a mistake. Then she felt it. The bond. She had nurtured that thread for years, the invisible thing that runs between 2 wolves meant for each other. The thing she had tended in the dark, like a coal she was afraid to let go out. She felt it pull taut in her chest, and then she felt it stretch, reach, move past her the way a river moves past a stone that thought it was the shore, until it caught on someone else entirely, and closed, and left her holding nothing. Her wolf howled inside her, confused, wounded, a sound that never reached her throat. Garrick set the collar around Morwenna's throat. "I claim you as my mate," he said. "My Luna, my forever." Aveline could not breathe, could not move, could not look away as Morwenna lifted her chin to bare her throat and spoke the sacred words, back her eyes finding Aveline over Garrick's shoulder for one bright, unbearable instant. She was smiling. Around Aveline the hall rippled with sound, the shocked intake of 1,000 breaths, the low churn of whispers, pity and satisfaction moving together like oil on water. She felt Linnea's hand grab for hers. She felt her sister's sharp cry, half her name, half a sob. But Aveline was already gone. Here is the thing they would talk about for years afterward, in the kitchens and the training yards and the long dark of the winter barracks. They would say, She walked out like a queen. They would say she did not run, did not stumble, did not weep. They would be wrong about the weeping. She wept the moment the courtyard doors closed behind her, but they were right about the rest, because she did not beg. She had spent her whole life being told that a woman's worth was a thing men handed to her, the way you hand someone a cup, and she had held out her hands and waited for 22 years. And in the space of a single breath, she understood that the cup had always been empty, that it had never been his to give, that the waiting itself had been the lie. So she lifted her chin, and she turned, and she walked the length of that hall, through a corridor of pitying faces, with her spine straight and her eyes dry, and not one wolf there had the courage to meet her gaze. Behind her, she heard Garrick call out, "Let the celebration begin." He had not noticed she was leaving. That was the last small mercy, that he did not even see her go. The courtyard was empty and cold, the sky above High Moor scattered with hard, bright stars. She had not thought to bring a cloak. Of course she hadn't. She had expected to spend this night warm, wanted held, not fleeing across frozen stones with her breath tearing out of her in white ribbons and the marks of moonstones still pressed into her scalp. She made it as far as the old well before her legs stopped agreeing to hold her. She did not fall. She simply stood there, with one hand on the cold stone lip of the well, and let the tears come silent and furious, because there was no one to see, and so no reason to keep pretending. And in the dark, behind her tears, she catalogued the signs she had refused to read. The cancelled suppers, the councils that ran late, the way his eyes had learned to slide past her in a crowded room, gentle and absent, the way you look past furniture. She had made excuses for every one of them. She had been such a fool, a patient, faithful, well-behaved fool, and it had gutted her all the same. "Going somewhere, little wolf?" She went very still. The voice came from the deep shadow at the courtyard's edge, low and unhurried and edged, with something that was not quite mockery and not quite kindness. She knew it. Every wolf in the Northern Territories knew it the way you know the sound of thunder before you've learned the word for it. She turned. He came out of the dark, like he'd been carved from it. The Alpha of Blackthorn. The enemy her people had taught her to hate before she could speak, the pack that had bled High Moor for 3 generations, whose warriors had killed her uncle, whose old Alpha had killed Garrick's father. He was nothing like Garrick. Where Garrick was warm coloring and easy warmth, this man was all winter. Black hair cropped close at the sides, a pale, unsettling gray, to his eyes silver, where the torchlight caught them. A thin scar cut through his left brow, and everything about the way he held himself said that the scar had cost the other man far more. Corvin Halden. "The ceremony isn't open to outsiders," Aveline said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to. "I wasn't inside." He tilted his head, studying her with an attention that made her skin prickle. "I was waiting out here. For you. For me. I heard the night might be interesting." His gaze moved over her, the white gown, the moonstones, the wreck of a bride with no groom. "It seems the rumors were kind. They said you'd been set aside. They didn't say you'd walk out looking like you'd set them aside." Heat climbed her throat. "I wasn't set aside. May." He took a step closer, unhurried, a man who had never in his life needed to rush toward anything. "Then why are you out here alone, dressed like a bride, while your Alpha drinks inside with another woman on his arm?" She had no answer that wasn't a wound. He stopped an arm's length away. She could feel him now, the pressure of an Alpha's dominance rolling off him, but nothing like Garrick's warm summer weight. This was colder, sharper, like standing at the mouth of a cave that breathed out winter. "I have a proposal," he said. "I'm not interested in anything you have to offer. You haven't heard the terms. I don't need to. Your people killed my uncle. Mine killed your father's father. There is nothing you could say to me in this courtyard that I would want to hear." "Come with me," he said, as if she hadn't spoken. "Be my mate instead. And I will make Garrick Vale regret every breath he draws for the rest of his short, comfortable life." She stared at him. The cruelty of it should have turned her stomach. It was monstrous, a political marriage to the enemy of her blood, offered like a blade across an open palm. Every rule she had ever been taught screamed at her to refuse to walk back inside, to face her humiliation with the dignity her father would have wanted. Except dignity had not protected her. Faith had not protected her. She had done everything correctly, waited patiently, loved completely, and it had ruined her anyway. And somewhere under the ruin, a small dark voice she barely recognized as her own whispered, "Let him see. Let Garrick see what he threw into the courtyard like scraps. Let the whole pack watch the woman they pitied stand at the side of their oldest enemy and let them choke on it." "What do you get out of this?" she said. Not yes, not no. Something between them which was the most honest thing she'd said all night. "An advantage." He said it plainly, without heat. "A Luna from a Highmore bloodline strengthens my claim to the disputed valleys. Your knowledge of this pack is worth more than an army." A pause. The corner of his mouth moved not quite a smile. "And I will admit to a certain interest in watching Garrick Vale's face when he understands what he lost. So I'd be a weapon. You'd be protected, respected, given real authority." He let that sit. "Can you say the same of what waited for you in there?" She thought of Garrick's hand settling that collar onto another woman's throat. She thought of the pitying corridor she had just walked. She thought of the years ahead of her, here, the almost Luna, the cautionary tale, the woman. Other women glanced at and pulled their daughters a little closer. "This is madness," she whispered. "Almost certainly." He did not smile. "You still haven't said no." She looked back at the great. Through the tall windows, she could see the celebration blazing on without her light and music and the swirl of dancers. Garrick and Morwenna at the bright center of it all, laughing. He had not looked for her. Not once. "If I come with you," she said slowly, and her voice did not shake. "What exactly is this?" Something moved in his pale eyes. Interest, maybe. Or surprise. "A formal mating bond. A political alliance. You would be Luna of Blackthorn, in name and in authority, with everything that carries." He paused. "Beyond that I expect nothing. No affection. No pretense of love. This is a partnership of use and nothing more. I have no love to give you, and I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. No love." It should have wounded her further. Instead, it landed like the only true thing anyone had offered her all night. Garrick had promised her forever, and given her the courtyard. This man promised her nothing, and looked her in the eye while he did it. "And if I want to leave?" she asked. "After the bond is sealed, you may petition for separation after 1 year. I won't hold you." His jaw tightened so slightly she almost missed it. "I don't keep unwilling prisoners. I have reasons to be sure of that. 1 year. 1 year in the house of her enemy, and then a door she could walk through. Or a lifetime here, watching Garrick's children grow up calling another woman Luna. Corvin held out his hand, bare, ungloved, pale in the starlight. "Do we have a deal?" Aveline looked at that hand. She thought of her father, who had died believing this pack would keep its promises to his daughter. She thought of her mother, Elira, dead these many years, who used to tell her strange stories in the dark, a woman with flame-colored hair who made flowers bloom in the deep of winter, a great-aunt or a great-great-grandmother, a fairy tale to send a child to sleep. She thought of Linnea, still inside, still 19, who would wake tomorrow to find her sister gone. "I'll come back for you," she promised her sister silently. "However this ends, I will come back for you." And then Aveline Voss, daughter of the late Beta of Highmoor, laid her hand in the open palm of her people's oldest enemy. "Deal." His fingers closed around hers. They were cold, not cool, not chilled by the night air. Cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. Cold the way the deep water under ice is cold, the way something that has never once in its life been warm is cold. It went through her thin glove and up her arm, and she almost pulled back on instinct, and a shadow of something she couldn't name crossed his face and was gone. "Then we go," he said, releasing her hand, as if he'd felt her flinch and would not make her endure it. "My wolves are waiting past the tree line." She did not look back at the hall again. She followed the enemy into the dark and left everything she had ever known, blazing bright and indifferent, behind her. The journey to Blackthorn took 3 days. They rode through mountain passes where the wind came down off the snowfields like a living thing through black forests, where the trees grew so close the sky vanished, stopping only when the horses could go no farther. Corvin's escort was small, 6 warriors, hard-eyed and silent, who looked at Aveline the way you look at a wolf that has wandered into your camp and not yet decided whether it means to bite. They said nothing to her. She was their alpha's business, not theirs. Corvin himself barely spoke. He rode ahead on a black horse, a solitary shape against the white, his back straight, and his gaze fixed on the road. When they made camp, he gave his orders in a low voice, and then vanished to walk the perimeter alone. He did not eat with them. He did not sleep near them. He wrapped himself in his own silence the way another man might wrap himself in a cloak, and Aveline told herself she was grateful for the distance, because she needed the room to think, and she had a great deal to think about. Walking away with the enemy Alpha had felt like strength in the torch-lit courtyard. Out here, 3 days deep in unfamiliar country, surrounded by wolves who despised her, wearing a bride's gown gone gray with road dust, it felt increasingly like the act of a woman who had lost her mind along with her future. But she watched him. She couldn't help it. She watched the way he moved, controlled and economical, never a wasted motion. She watched the way his warriors deferred to him without a word passing between them. And on the second night, when a young wolf named Owen took a bad fall on the ice and cracked 2 ribs, she watched Corvin kneel in the snow beside the boy and set the bindings himself, his cold hands gentle, his voice low and steady. And she thought, that is not what they told me the monster of Blackthorn would do. She turned that over for a long time. On the 3rd morning, they crested a high ridge, and Blackthorn opened up below them, and Aveline forgot for one moment to be afraid. She had expected a fortress, something brutal and functional walls built for killing a place that matched the reputation of the man who ruled it. Instead, she saw a valley cradled between snow-crowned mountains, and rising from its heart, a castle of dark stone, sheer and dramatic and unashamed, The kind of place that did not ask to be admired so much as it simply expected it. Smoke rose from 100 chimneys. Terraced fields lay quiet under snow, waiting for spring. "Welcome home," Corvine said. She hadn't heard him ride up beside her. "It's beautiful," she admitted before she could think better of it. "It's practical." His tone put the compliment gently back where it came from. "The mountains defend it. The valley feeds it. We answer to no one for anything we need." He nudged his horse forward, which is the only kind of beauty worth trusting. The gates opened as they approached, and wolves poured out to greet their returning alpha and stopped one by one as they saw who rode at his side. Aveline felt the weight of every stare. She was the enemy here, the daughter of the man whose raiders had bled their borders. The woman their alpha had, for reasons none of them could fathom, brought home like a prize. She could feel the hostility rolling off them, held barely in check by the presence of the man beside her. She lifted her chin and met their eyes. One by one. She would not cower. She had made this choice with her own 2 hands, and she would wear it standing up. A woman came forward out of the crowd. Older 50 perhaps, with iron-gray hair drawn back so severely it looked painful and sharp. Brown eyes that took in Aveline's dust-gray gown and moonstone-marked hair and missed nothing at all. Authority came off her like heat off a stone. "You've come back," she said to Corvin, "and you've brought a guest." "Not a guest." Corvin swung down from the saddle and handed his reins to a waiting hand. "My future Luna." The courtyard went silent. The woman's expression did not change, but something crossed behind her eyes, quick as a fish under ice. She turned to Aveline and studied her with an intensity that felt like being read aloud. "Aveline Voss," she said, "daughter of the late Beta Aldwin Voss, sister to the girl who stayed behind at Highmoor." A pause. "You have your father's eyes." Aveline went very still. "You knew my father." "I knew of him. A skilled warrior, a worthy enemy, and I do not use that word lightly." The faintest curve touched the woman's mouth. "I am Nerys Hulden, Corvin's aunt and the keeper of this house. You'll call me Lady Nerys. Not warm, but not cruel either." Aveline inclined her head. "Lady Nerys." Nerys turned back to her nephew. "The council will have questions." "The council will have answers when I'm ready to give them." Corvin's tone left no crack to work at. "For now have quarters prepared in the East Wing. Lady Aveline is to be treated with the respect owed the future Luna of this pack." A murmur moved through the gathered wolves. Nerys's brows lifted barely. "The East Wing. That adjoins your own chambers." "I'm aware." He offered nothing else. "See it done." And he strode into the castle without a backward glance, leaving Aveline alone in a courtyard full of wolves who plainly wished she had frozen to death somewhere in the passes. Nerys watched him go. Then she looked at Aveline, and for just a moment, the sharpness in her face gave way to something that might have been curiosity, or might have been pity, or might have been both. "Come," she said. "I'll show you to your rooms." The inside of the castle was warmer than the outside had promised. Fires burned in great hearths. Thick tapestries covered the black stone hunts and battles, and enormous wolves running under a full moon. Servants moved through the corridors on quiet feet, bowing as Nerys passed their eyes flicking to Aveline and away again, curious and cold. Her chambers, when they reached them, were not what she'd braced for. A wide bed, heaped with dark furs. Tall windows looking out over the whole white valley. A private bathing room where a tub steamed gently in the lamplight. Someone had lit the fire ahead of them. Someone had laid out fresh clothes. Whatever else Blackthorn thought of her, it had prepared for her arrival. "Servants will attend you," Nerys said from the doorway. "The formal announcement of the engagement will be tomorrow evening. Rest tonight. You'll want your strength." "Lady Nerys." Aveline stopped her before she could go. "Why did he really choose me?" The older woman paused. "Political advantage doesn't explain it," Aveline went on. "Alphas don't mate their enemies' daughters for the sake of a valley. There's a reason I can't see. I'd rather know it now than be surprised by it later." Nerys regarded her for a long moment, and Aveline had the unsettling sense of being weighed on a very old, very accurate scale. "My nephew does nothing without a reason," Nerys said at last. "Whether he shares his reasons with you is not my choice to make." She stepped toward the threshold. Stopped. "But I'll tell you one true thing, because you asked it standing up instead of sitting down. And that's rare enough here. Corvin does nothing on a whim. Nothing. If he chose you, it was not carelessness. It was the opposite." And she was gone before Aveline could ask what the opposite of carelessness was. Alone Aveline crossed to the window and looked out at the strange white country that was apparently now her home. Somewhere far beyond those mountains, Linnea would be frantic. Garrick would be furious, not grieving, she thought. Furious. His pride wounded, his prize walked off into the night on the arm of his enemy. Good. Let him be furious. Let him feel something for once that he had not carefully arranged in advance. She was still standing there when a knock came at the door. "Come in." The door opened, and Corvin stepped through it, and the large room seemed abruptly smaller. Aveline straightened. "I thought we were keeping distance." "I said I expected nothing from you." He closed the door behind him, and the fire popped in the sudden quiet. "That isn't the same thing. There are matters we need to settle before the announcement, and I'd rather you hear them from me than from the council." "What matters?" He moved to the fireplace and stood with his back to her, and the firelight did nothing to warm the pale of his skin. "The bond. For it to be real, for both packs to recognize it, for it to hold under challenge, it has to be completed fully. That means a marking." She understood. The bite. The physical claiming that would bind their wolves together. Permanent, unbreakable. She had grown up expecting to give that mark to Garrick. "You want to mark me," she said. "I need to mark you. And you'll need to mark me." He said it flatly, stripped of anything but fact. "Without it, the bond can be challenged. Garrick could petition to reclaim you as a stolen asset, as property crossed a border without consent." His voice cooled further on the word property, as though he found it distasteful in his own mouth. "I won't have you spend your life waiting to be dragged back." The thought of being reclaimed by Garrick turned her stomach. "When?" "Tomorrow, after the announcement before the pack. It has to be witnessed." He turned to face her. "It will hurt. I'll make it as quick as I can. I won't lie to you about the pain the way people lie to brides, and I won't pretend it's a gift when it's a bargain." She absorbed that. She had known it would come. She had not known it would come so fast, or that he would speak of it so plainly, or that his plainness would steady her more than any comfort could have. "And after?" she asked carefully. "After we go on as agreed. A partnership. Separate lives under one roof," he paused. "Unless you've changed your mind. You can still change your mind. The door out of this is open until the moment it closes, and I'd rather you walk back through it now than resent me for a lifetime." She should have been relieved. He was offering her exactly what he'd promised: protection, without demand power, without intimacy. A clean, cold contract, with the terms written where she could read them. But standing there watching firelight fail to warm him, She felt something that was not relief, something she had no name for, and did not trust. "I haven't changed my mind," she said. "Good." He moved toward the door, stopped one hand on the frame. "One more thing." "Yes." For just a moment, something cracked in the winter of his face, a flash of something almost undefended, quickly buried. "Whatever you see tomorrow, whatever you hear about me from the council or the crowd or my own aunt, remember that you chose this. With your eyes open." His voice dropped. "And remember, I told you plainly in that courtyard, I have no love to give. Believe that whatever else you come to believe." Then he was gone, and the door closed soft behind him, and Aveline stood with a question rising in her throat that she could not quite shape. What did he mean, "whatever you hear about me"? What was Corvin Halden so certain she would find out? The great hall of Blackthorn was nothing like the one she'd fled. Where Highmoor had been gold and candlelight and silver banners, Blackthorn was carved from shadow. Iron chandeliers hung from a ceiling of black stone. Torches guttered in wall sconces, throwing the crowd into flickering half-light. The banners here ran deep crimson, each one stamped with the Halden crest, a wolf's head ringed in thorns. Aveline stood at the entrance, with her heart slamming against her ribs. Neris's servants had dressed her for this. Not in white, never again in white, but in a gown of midnight blue. So dark, it drank the torchlight. Her hair loose down her back, a moonstone's nothing of the bride she'd been 4 nights ago. This was a different rite entirely, and they had dressed her to look like she belonged to it. "Ready?" Neris asked beside her. "Does it matter?" "No." The older woman's mouth twitched. "But I find it polite to ask." The doors swung open. Hundreds of wolves turned to watch her come. She felt their hatred, like a weight against her chest, pressing from all sides. These were not her people. These were the wolves whose brothers and fathers and sons had died on Highmoor spears, and whose grief had a shape, and whose grief was now expected to bow to one of the enemy as its Luna. She walked anyway. The whispers followed her like a tide going out. "That's her, the Highmoor woman. Her father led the raid at the Thornwood Ford. He's lost his mind, our Alpha. He's brought a viper to our hearth." Corvin stood at the far end, on a raised dais, dressed in black, his face carved from the same stone as the walls. But when his eyes found hers across the length of that hostile hall, something passed between them. Not warmth, an acknowledgement, a steadiness held out to her across the dark, as if to say, "I know what this is costing you. Keep walking." She kept walking. She climbed the steps and took her place at his side, chin up, spine straight, and gave the hall not one flicker of the fear moving under her skin. The High Elder of Blackthorn came forward, a man so old he made the Highmoor priestess look young. White-bearded, his eyes clouded with too many years and too much death. "We gather to witness acclaiming," he intoned. "Our Alpha Corvin Halden has chosen his mate." The crowd stirred restless. "But before the bond is sealed," the elder went on, his voice hardening, "any wolf of this pack may speak an objection. If the objection is judged sound, the claiming does not proceed." This had not been in anything Corvin told her, and Aveline felt the ground tilt under her. A man shoved forward from the crowd almost before the elder had finished. He was enormous, scarred, old hatred burning steady in his dark eyes. "I object." His voice boomed off the black stone. "This woman is the Get of Aldwyn Voss. Her father put my 2 sons in the ground at the Thornwood Ford, and now I'm to bow to her. Call her Luna. Bare my throat to Highmoor blood At my own Alpha's table. A low growl of agreement moved through the hall. He leveled a thick finger at her. She was raised to hate us, raised on stories of our dead as bedtime tales. How do we trust her not to open the gates the first cold night? How do we trust her? At all? Aveline opened her mouth. And here is where the story might have gone, the way the old ones always went. The man steps forward. The Alpha steps in front of her. The woman is defended, protected, spoken for. Except that was not the story Aveline had walked out of the Highmore courtyard to live. She had spent 22 years letting men decide her worth in rooms full of other men, and she had bled for it, and she was done. So she stepped forward first. She put her hand lightly on Corvin's arm, not for support. To stop him. To tell him with a touch, "This one is mine." And she felt his surprise ripple down through the contact, and she felt him go still and let her. "What's your name?" she asked the scarred man. He blinked. He hadn't expected to be addressed. "Brannock," he said before he could decide whether to answer. "Brannock." She said it clearly so the whole hall heard her learn it. "Your sons died at the Thornwood Ford. I'm going to tell you something true, and you're going to hate me for it. And you can hate me, but you'll hear it first." She drew a breath. "My uncle died at the Thornwood Ford. Same day, same mud. Maybe by one of your son's hands. I don't know. I was 14. I remember the wailing came up from the southern houses for 3 nights, and nobody would tell me why because they thought I was too young to carry it." The hall had gone quiet in a different way now. "I didn't choose that war," she said. "You didn't either. Neither did your sons. It was handed to all of us by men who are already dead, and it has been feeding on our children for 3 generations, and I am so tired of it, Brannock. I am so tired of it that I walked away from my own pack to stand in this hall and be hated by you. Because I would rather be hated here doing something new than be pitied there, doing the same old dying." Nobody spoke. "You don't have to trust me," she finished. "Trust is earned, and I haven't earned anything from you yet. But don't stand there and tell me I don't understand your grief. I have buried the same grief you have. The only difference between us is that I'm ready to stop digging." For a long moment, Brannock simply stared at her, his big hands opening and closing at his sides. Then his gaze flicked once to his Alpha, to see perhaps whether he was about to be struck down for the objection. But Corvin had not moved. Corvin was watching Aveline with an expression she would spend a long time trying to name, and he said nothing at all, because she had needed nothing at all. Brannock stepped back into the crowd. He did not bow. He did not soften. But he stepped back, and that was more than anyone in that hall had thought possible. And a murmur ran through the wolves that was not agreement exactly, but was no longer only hate. "The objection is answered," the elder declared. "The claiming will proceed." Corvin turned to her, and for the first time she saw plainly something beyond the cold mask. Not warmth, but respect, real startled, hard-won respect, the kind that costs the giver something. "I'm going to mark you now," he said quietly for her alone. "It will hurt. I'll be as quick as I know how to be." She nodded and tilted her head, and bared the join of her neck and shoulder to the enemy she had chosen. He leaned in. She felt his breath first cold against her skin, cold like wind off a frozen lake, wrong in a way she couldn't place. Then the sharp, bright pierce of his fangs sinking into her flesh. Pain lanced through her white and immediate. But under the pain, something else opened. A thread. Thin, new, impossibly fragile, unspooling between them where there had been nothing. The bond. She felt him land at the edge of her mind, like a shadow settling at the corner of a room, and what she felt from him was not cold at all. It was loneliness, vast, aching, old past counting. A loneliness so deep and so long carried that for a moment it staggered her, and she understood that this man had been standing at the mouth of that winter cave, breathing out cold to keep everyone else out for so long that he no longer remembered the shape of warmth. Corvin drew back. His face flickered for half a breath, the mask slipped, and she saw that the marking had cost him something too. Something she couldn't read. Blood dark on his lips. "Your turn," he said. She rose onto her toes and pressed her mouth to his throat. She could feel his pulse there, slow and steady under her lips. She let her wolf rise, and she bit down and completed the mark. And his blood filled her mouth, and it was cold. Not cool. Not the ordinary warmth of a living thing brought low by winter. Cold like snowmelt. Cold like water off a glacier that had never once in 1,000 years been touched by the sun. It shocked her so badly, she nearly pulled away every instinct in her screaming that blood should be warm, that this was wrong, that something in this man ran against the oldest laws of what living meant. She forced herself to finish. When she stepped back, his silver eyes were fixed on hers. He knew. I knew she'd felt it, the cold, the loneliness, the wrongness underneath the wrongness. She saw the knowledge land in his face, and she saw him decide in the same instant to say nothing about it in front of the pack. "The bond is sealed," the elder announced. "All hail the Luna of Blackthorn." The response was scattered, reluctant. A handful of wolves bowed. Most only stared their faces a shifting weather of suspicion and resentment, and here and there a grudging flicker of something newer. But Evelyn barely heard them. She was standing very still at the side of a man whose blood ran cold as a frozen river, feeling a fragile new thread hum between them, tasting winter on her tongue. And under the loneliness she had touched through the bond, there had been one more thing. She had felt it only for an instant, buried so deep he had probably spent his whole life hiding it even from himself. Shame. Crushing, bottomless, ancient shame. What was wrong with him? She thought, as the reluctant Hall bowed to her one grudging wolf at a time. What had happened to this man to freeze him from the inside out? And what exactly had he meant when he warned her about the things she would hear? She looked out at the sea of hostile faces that were now impossibly her people. She looked at the crimson banners with their thorn-ringed wolves. She looked at the cold, careful, lonely man beside her, who had promised her nothing, and so far had kept every promise he made. 4 nights ago she had stood in a hall of gold and light, certain that her whole future depended on whether one man chose to speak her name. He hadn't, and she was still here, still standing, still herself, more herself somehow, in this cold black hall full of enemies than she had ever been in the warm gold one full of friends. Being chosen, she understood now, had never been the same as being cherished. She had spent 22 years confusing the two. It had taken losing everything in a single breath to finally tell them apart. Whatever waited for her in this frozen valley, the curse she could already feel humming under the surface of the bond, the shame in her cold husband's blood, the enemies at her back, and the ones she couldn't yet see, she would meet it, standing up. She had chosen this with her own 2 hands. And for the first time in her life that felt less like a sentence and more like a beginning. The days that followed fell into a shape Aveline had not expected. She woke each morning alone. Corvin was always gone before the light came off to the training yards. The council chamber, the endless business of a pack that had spent 3 generations at war and did not know how to stop. She would wake in the wide bed under the dark furs and reach half asleep for a warmth that had never once been there, and find only the cold hollow where he had not slept. Because he did not sleep beside her. He came to her chambers in the deep of night. Never before the castle was dark. He would knock, always wait for her to answer, as though the door were hers and not his, to open as he pleased, and he would come in quiet and careful, and he would leave again before the first gray light without a word of explanation. And every night, the ice was a little less. She noticed it the way you notice a season turning. The first night, frost had climbed the bedposts and left the water pitcher skinned with a thin white crust by morning. The next, only the window glass wore its ferns of ice. The night after that, nothing. Nothing but the cold of his hands, which never warmed, and the cold of his mouth, which warmed against hers by slow degrees, like something remembering a language it had forgotten, it knew. She should have been afraid of him. Everyone told her to be. The servants crossed themselves in the old way when the temperature dropped in a corridor. Brannock watched her at meals with an expression that said he was waiting for the winter to take her too. And Corvin warned her over and over, in 100 small silences, that he was not safe, that she should keep her distance. That whatever this was, it could not be more than the bargain they had struck, except he touched her, like she was made of something that would shatter. Except the first time in the dark, when his cold hands found the laces of her gown, and his fingers were shaking. He had stopped and asked her whether she was sure. Except no one in 22 years in a life spent being handed from her father's house to her almost husband's had ever once asked Aveline Voss whether she was sure of anything. Garrick had never asked. Garrick had assumed. For 22 years, Garrick had assumed her, like you assume the sun, and she had let him, because being assumed had felt back then like being loved. It had not been love. She knew that now. She knew it the way you know a counterfeit coin once you've finally held the real thing in your palm, by weight, by the way. So no, she was not afraid of the cold man who knocked at her door. She was afraid of something else entirely, and it took her nearly 2 weeks to give it a name. She was falling for him, and that frightened her far more than the frost ever could. Her mornings belonged to Nerys. The keeper of the house had taken it upon herself to make Aveline into a Luna, whether the pack wanted one or not. They spent the gray early hours in the solar, with the household ledgers spread between them. The grain stores, the winter accounts, the long lists of names and grudges and debts that made up a pack, the way stones make up a wall. Aveline learned quickly. She had her father's mind for it, the same one that had made Aldwyn Voss a beta. Men trusted with their lives, and Nerys, who did not give praise, gave it anyway, once grudgingly, by handing Aveline the accounts a full week early, and saying nothing about it at all. She learned the names. She learned the histories. She learned which families had lost the most to the war, and carried the coldest grudges, and she made a quiet study of learning them by heart, because a Luna who could not name your dead was no Luna at all. And she learned slowly the shape of the thing no one would speak of directly. The way conversations stopped when she entered a room. The way old servants glanced at the corners when Corvin's name came up as if checking for frost. The way even Nerys, sharp, unflinching Nerys, would go quiet and careful whenever Aveline steered too close to the question of why an alpha's blood ran cold as a winter river. There was a curse on this house. Aveline had known it since the moment she tasted snowmelt on her tongue in the great hall. She could feel it now, through the bond all the time, a low. constant note beneath Corvin's every mood, the way you feel a draft in an old house, and know without seeing it that somewhere a window has never quite closed. She just didn't know its shape yet, so she decided to find out. Not by asking. She had learned in 2 weeks at Blackthorn that asking got her careful eyes and closed mouths. She learned something else instead, that this castle was very, very old, and that old castles keep their secrets, the way old people do, not in their words, but in their papers in the drawers. Nobody opens in the rooms at the ends of halls that no one has swept in a generation. The archive was in the North Tower. She found it on the 15th day, following a servant's offhand complaint about the damp up there ruining the old records. Nobody stopped her. She was the Luna now, or near enough doors opened for her that would have stayed shut for anyone else, and she was learning to walk through them before anyone remembered to wonder whether she should. The room was cold and close and thick with dust shelves sagging under the weight of 200 years of a pack's memory. Birth records, death records, treaties, most of them broken, and deep in the back, behind a curtain of cobweb, a locked chest with the Halden crest worked into its lid, the wolf's head, the ring of thorns. The lock was old. Her father had taught her a great many things a beta's daughter had no business knowing, and picking an old lock was one of them. Inside she found the truth, or the beginning of it. The book was bound in gray leather, gone soft with age, and it was written in 3 different hands across 2 centuries, each keeper of the house adding to it in turn, and it was Aveline understood as she read a record of the curse itself. She read it by the thin light of the tower window, her breath clouding her cold fingers, turning the brittle pages. She read about a winter witch, a woman of real power who had hidden her nature to marry into the Halden line generations back. She read about the day she was discovered and the alpha of that age who called her magic an abomination and what he did to her for it. Aveline's stomach turned at the plainness of the account. They had not been gentle. They were never gentle, the men who decided a woman's power was a thing to be feared. But the magic had not died with the witch. It passed to her children and to their children, thinning in most of them to almost nothing a knack for sensing a lie, a chill in the fingertips, but running true and terrible in one child of each generation, one heir who inherited the whole cold weight of it. Winter living inside a body. Cold generated the way other wolves generated heat. And then Aveline reached the part written in the newest hand. Neris's hand, she was certain of it, the same precise slant as the ledgers, and her cold fingers went still on the page. Because it was not only a curse of cold, it was a curse of love. The winter witch had not been the one to lay it. She had been its first victim. The curse had been placed on the whole Halden line by a coven, a circle of winter witches who wanted the family's power for their own, and who bound it with the cruelest hook they could devise. Every Halden alpha who came to feel true love would freeze from the inside out. The deeper the love, the deeper the cold. The heart that opened would be the heart that killed him. Aveline read that line 3 times. The moment he cares, the cold comes back. She thought of the frost climbing the bedposts on the first night when there had been nothing between them but a bargain. She thought of how the ice had lessened night after night, and she had told herself it meant he was learning control. Except that wasn't it at all. The ice had lessened because he was holding himself back. Not the cold, the caring. He had felt the danger the moment it began, felt himself starting to slip toward her, and he had been fighting it every single night, freezing his own heart, shut on purpose so that it would not freeze the rest of him solid. The careful distance, the knock at the door, the leaving before dawn. It had never been about protecting her. It had been about staying alive. And then there was the last entry, the one that made her set the book down on the dusty floor and press both cold hands to her mouth. There had been a girl, when Corvin was 15. Before he understood what he carried, before he learned to lock it down. A girl he had cared for, in the simple, headlong way a boy of 15 cares. And a winter had come out of him one night that he could not stop. She did not survive it. Nerys had written the account in 3 short sentences, and the shortness of them was its own kind of grief. He was 15. She was buried before the thaw. He has not let himself feel deeply for anyone since. Aveline sat on the cold stone floor of the North Tower, with 200 years of a family's suffering open on her knees, and she understood at last the shame she had tasted in his blood. He thought he had killed the last person he let himself love. I thought loving was the same as killing. And he had chosen her the enemy's daughter, the woman raised to hate him, the coldest possible match, precisely because he was certain he could never come to love her. She had been to him the safest wife in the world. Someone he could stand beside for 50 years, without ever once being tempted to feel the thing that would destroy him. That had been the whole point of her. Aveline pressed her cold hands harder against her mouth, and she did not cry, because crying was not what this deserved, because she had felt it. Hadn't she? Through the bond, these past 2 weeks, the way his cold was easing, the way he lingered a moment longer each night before he left, the way 3 days ago he had almost fallen asleep beside her, and had caught himself at the very edge of it, and risen and gone, and she had thought it was reluctance, and it had been something else. He was starting to feel something, and if this book told the truth, then whatever he was starting to feel for her was going to kill him. She found Nerys in the solar, and she did not bother to hide where she had been. The debt was on her sleeves. The gray book was in her hands. Nerys looked at the book, then at Aveline's face. Then she set down her quill and folded her hands in her lap, and for the first time since Aveline had come to Blackthorn, the older woman looked tired all the way through. "You went into the North Tower," Nerys said. "I did." "That chest was locked." It was. Aveline set the book on the table between them. "My father taught me things. I've stopped apologizing for knowing them." For a long moment, Nerys said nothing. Then slowly, "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. Not because I fear you'll use it. Because he will never forgive me if he learns you heard it from me, and not from him. And he has few enough people left to trust. I've read most of it already." Reading isn't the same as understanding. Nerys's sharp eyes held hers. "You've read that he's cursed. You've read that a girl died. What you haven't read because I never wrote it down is the rest." She drew a breath. "The curse doesn't only kill child. It keeps. Winter magic of this size doesn't simply sit in a bloodline for 200 years, running on its own. A curse like this has to be fed." Aveline went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the room. "Fed how? Power. Regular offerings of it, given by the ones who cast it. The coven that laid this curse didn't do it and walk away. They've been tending it for 2 centuries. Every Haldan Alpha who's frozen every heart that stopped every drop of life, the winter's taken. It hasn't just been lost." Nerys's voice was very flat, the flatness of someone who had lived a long time with a terrible thing. "It's been harvested, fed back to them. Every death in this family has made the ones who cursed us stronger." Aveline stared at her. They're still out there. They must be. A curse this size, still holding, still hungry. Someone is feeding it. Right now. Tonight. Neris's jaw tightened. I've spent 30 years trying to learn who. I found nothing. They hide well. They've had 200 years of practice. Aveline's mind was moving very fast, now faster than she could quite follow the way water moves right before a falls. Because if the curse had to be fed, if someone somewhere was still tending it, still drawing power from every frozen Holden heart, then breaking it, if it could even be broken, would not just free Corvin. It would cut off whoever had been drinking from this family for 200 years. And people who have grown strong on a thing they've been drinking for 200 years, she thought. Do not simply let it go. Why are you telling me this? She asked. You could have let me read half the book and closed the chest. Why the rest? Neris looked at her for a long, long moment. Because I've watched him these 2 weeks, she said finally, and something in her severe old face cracked just slightly, just enough. The way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. The way he says your name like it's a word in a language he's ashamed to have learned. He's slipping Aveline. He believed he'd chosen a woman he could never love, and he was wrong, and it is going to kill him. Her voice dropped. He chose you because he thought you were safe, and you have turned out to be the most dangerous thing that has ever walked into this house. The words landed on Aveline like snow off a roof. What happens if he falls in love with me? She asked. Her voice was barely steady. All the way. What happens then? Neris did not answer. Neris did not have to. That night, Corvin knocked. Aveline was standing at the window when he came in, and she did not turn, and he stopped just inside the door, and she felt his stillness through the bond before she heard it. You've been to the tower, he said. It was not a question. Yes. You've spoken to my aunt. Yes. A long silence. When she finally turned to face him, he had not moved from the door, and every line of his body was drawn tight, and the frost was already beginning to bloom in the corners of the window glass behind her. Then you know, he said. I know what she told me. She crossed the room toward him, slow, giving him every chance to retreat, and he did not retreat, which was its own kind of surrender. I know about the witch, about the curse, about the coven that's still feeding on it. She stopped an arm's length away. And I know about the girl, when you were 15. Pain moved across his face before he could lock it down. Then you should be afraid of me, he said. Finally. As you should have been from the start. I'm not. You should be. His voice cracked on it. I killed her, Aveline. I didn't mean to, and it doesn't matter that I didn't mean to, because she is just as dead as if I had. I have spent every year since making certain it could never happen again. I built my whole life around one rule: don't feel it. Don't feel it too much. Keep the door shut, and the cold will stay quiet. He looked at her, and there was something wild and cornered in his silver eyes. And then I stood in a courtyard and watched a woman walk out of her own claiming with her head up, and I thought there is someone I could stand beside for 50 years and never once be tempted. There is a wife who will never make me forget the rule. And Aveline whispered, and I was wrong. The frost was climbing the window in earnest, now ferns and feathers of it, spreading across the black glass. I was so wrong. You don't leave me anywhere to hide, do you? You never have. From the first night in that courtyard, you looked at me like I was a man and not a monster, and I have not had a single quiet night since. I'm not afraid of you, she said again. You should be afraid for me then. He laughed, and there was no humor in it, Because I am starting to. He stopped. He could not finish it. She watched him physically stop the word before it could leave his mouth, the way you'd catch a falling child. If I say it, it becomes true. And if it becomes true, it kills me. So I won't say it. I will stand in this room and I will not say it, and you cannot make me. And here was the moment. Here was where the old story would have her fall into his arms. Weep, confess. Let love do its reckless work. Except Aveline had just spent an afternoon on a cold stone floor reading exactly what love did to this man. So she did not fall into his arms. She stepped back. She put distance between them with her own 2 feet, the way he had been doing for 2 weeks, and she watched the confusion move across his face. And then the frost on the window slowed, stopped, began very faintly to melt. Then we don't say it, she said, and her voice was steadier than her heart. Not yet. Not until we understand what we're doing. I won't be the thing that kills you, Corvin. I would rather want you from across a room for the rest of my life than hold you once and lose you. She swallowed. So we're careful, both of us, until we know how to break this. He stared at her like she'd struck him. Break it. You think it can be broken. I think anything one woman cast another woman can undo. She lifted her chin. And I think whoever's been feeding on your family for 200 years has grown very comfortable and very careless, and I intend to make them regret it. For a long moment he just looked at her. Then he crossed the room, slow, deliberate, giving her the same chance to retreat that she'd given him. And he took her cold hand in his colder one, and he pressed his forehead to hers, and neither of them said the word, and the window behind them stayed clear. It was, Aveline thought, the most careful thing 2 people had ever done. Loving each other by refusing to, holding the door shut together from opposite sides. It could not last. She knew that even then. Some doors are not built to stay shut. The thing that broke it open came 3 days later, and it came as these things do from the direction she was not watching. Linnea arrived at Blackthorn on a gray morning at the end of the 3rd week. Aveline had not sent for her, would never have sent for her, would never have dragged her gentle little sister across the frozen passes into the house of the enemy. But Linnea had come anyway, travel-worn and half-frozen and 19 and stubborn, because word had reached High Moor that the discarded Voss daughter had bonded herself to the monster of Blackthorn, and Linnea had refused to believe her sister was safe until she saw it with her own eyes. Aveline held her in the courtyard for a long time and did not let go. "You foolish girl," she said into her sister's hair. "You beautiful, foolish girl. Do you know what could have happened to you in those passes?" "You went through them," Linnea said, muffled against her shoulder. "Alone. With him. Everyone said you'd been stolen. Everyone said—" She pulled back and her eyes were wet and searching. "Av, tell me you're all right. Tell me and I'll believe you. I'm all right." And to her own surprise, Aveline found she meant it. "I'm more all right than I've been in years. I know how that sounds. I can't explain it yet, but I'm going to." She brought Linnea inside. She gave her a room near her own. And for 2 bright days, it was almost easy her sister at her side, her strange new life beginning to feel less like exile and more like something she was building, and Aveline let herself believe foolishly that the danger was all still out ahead of her, somewhere waiting patient. It was not out ahead of her. It was already inside the walls. Because not every wolf in Blackthorn had stepped back the way Brannock had. There was one, a warrior named Halvard, whose brother had died on a high moor blade, whose grief had curdled into something that no longer resembled grief at all. He had bowed with the rest when the elder named her Luna. He had smiled at the meals, and he had spent 3 weeks watching the enemy's daughter walk his halls in his dead brother's place, and deciding in the private dark of his own ruin that if his alpha would not deal with the viper at his hearth, then someone would have to. He caught them in the lower corridor near the kitchens where Aveline had taken Linnea to show her the old bread ovens. It was empty there in the mid-afternoon. Quiet. Aveline heard him before she saw him. The wrongness in his footfall, all too fast, too purposeful, and she turned and she saw his face, and she knew. Halvard. She put herself in front of Linnea without thinking. Whatever this is, don't. You don't belong here. His voice was thick, unsteady, a man who had been drinking his hatred for weeks and had finally reached the bottom of the cup. My brother is in the ground, and you eat at our alpha's table. You, his. His eyes moved past her to Linnea, and everything in Aveline went to ice. 2 of you now. 2 Highmoor girls under our roof. How many more before he sees it? Look at me, Aveline said, sharp, pulling his gaze back. Not her. She's a child. She has nothing to do with anything. You have a grievance with Highmoor, you have it with me. Let her go, and I'll stand here and hear every word. But Halvard was past hearing words. She saw it happen in his eyes, the moment the man drowned and the animal surfaced. She saw his shape begin to blur at the edges, the shift coming on him fast and furious. Claws where hands had been, and she understood with a terrible clarity that he had not come to threaten. He had come to do it. And Linnea was behind her. 19 years old and unarmed and frozen in terror, her mother's gentleness offering no defense at all against what was uncurling in that corridor. Something happened in Aveline's chest. It was not decision. There was no time for decision. It was older than decision, older than thought. A thing that had been sleeping in her for 22 years, coiled and patient, behind every candle that ever burned too bright, every hearth that ever flared when she walked in, cold every curtain that ever caught and blackened when her temper slipped its leash. It woke. Heat bloomed in her chest, sudden and total, and poured down her arms into her hands, and Aveline threw out one palm toward the thing that meant to kill her sister, and screamed a single word that was not a word at all, just no. Just not her. Just everything she had, and fire came out of her. It erupted from her open hand in a sheet of gold, roaring brilliant, filling the whole corridor with a light and a heat that had no business existing in that cold stone place. It did not touch Linnea. It did not, she would realize later, shaking even touch Halvard. It went up and out and around a wall of flame between the 2 Voss sisters and the thing that meant them harm. And Halvard, the half-shifted wolf, recoiled from it with a yelp of pure animal terror and crashed backward into the far wall. The fire held for one endless second. Then it was gone, snuffed out as suddenly as it came, and Aveline was standing in a scorched corridor with her hand still outstretched and her ears ringing and the smell of smoke and singed stone thick in her throat. Silence. Linnea was staring at her. Halvard was staring at her crouched against the wall, half man and half wolf and wholly terrified. The hatred burned clean out of him and replaced with something far more primitive. And Aveline was staring at her own hand, at the palm that should have been burned to the bone and was not even warm, and she thought in a small, clear voice under the ringing, "Oh, Mother, your stories, they weren't stories. By the time the guards came running, drawn by the light and the noise, Halvard had already fled, shifted fully, and bolted, gone out through the kitchen yards into the mountains, and no one ever saw him in Blackthorn again. Aveline did not send anyone after him. She had frightened him past return, and that was enough, and she found she had no appetite for hunting a broken man through the snow. She got Linnea to her chamber. She held her sister until the shaking stopped, both of them, shaking truthfully, holding each other up. "You were on fire," Linnea kept saying, half laughing, half weeping. You were on fire. How were you on fire?" "I don't know," Aveline said, and then because it was the truest thing she could offer. "But I think I've always been. I think I just never had anything worth burning for." She did not tell Corvin. She meant to. She told herself she would that night when he knocked. But when the knock came, and she opened the door, and saw his face, the careful cornered holding the door shut face of a man loving her, by refusing to, she found she could not. Because she understood now what she was, fire. She was fire, and he was winter, and there was a thing rising up between them that neither of them had chosen, and neither of them could stop. And she needed to understand it, all of it, before she put it in his hands. She needed to know what fire did to winter, whether it warmed, whether it broke, whether it killed. So she kept his secret, and she kept her own, and the two of them stood in her chamber holding the door shut from opposite sides, and neither of them knew that the door was about to be kicked off its hinges entirely. The message came from High Moor a few days into the 4th week. Corvin brought it to her himself. She could feel his fury through the bond before he even reached her door, not the cold. This time, something hotter banked and dangerous. "Garrick," he said, and dropped the letter on the table. "He's demanding your return." Aveline read it. It was short, and it was ugly, and it was exactly what she should have expected. Garrick claimed the bond had been completed under duress, claimed she'd been stolen, kidnapped, taken across the border against her will, claimed the marriage was no marriage at all, but a Blackthorn crime against a daughter of High Moor. He was threatening war if Corvin didn't send her back. "He didn't want me," Aveline said, and her voice was flat with an old, tired disbelief. "He stood in front of 1,000 people, and chose another woman, and let me walk out into the cold. And now that I've walked somewhere he can't follow, suddenly I'm worth a war. He doesn't want you." Corvin's voice was very quiet, which she had learned was the most dangerous thing it could be. "He wants what your leaving did to his pride. There's a difference, and I think you already know it." "I know it." She set the letter down. "What will you do?" Corvin was quiet a moment. Then he crossed to the window and looked out at the dark valley, and when he spoke, the frost was already spidering across the glass. Let him come," he said softly. "Let him bring his whole army. He abandoned you. He discarded you in front of everyone he ruled, treated you like a thing he'd finished with." His voice dropped to something barely human. "If he wants you back now, he can come and take you off my throat. And he'll find out what it costs." Aveline's heart was pounding, because through the bond, she felt it all unguarded for the first time. No careful door held shut between them. His fury, his protectiveness, and underneath both running, like a cold river under ice, the thing he would not say. Thing that was killing him by slow degrees. The word neither of them was allowed to speak. He was in love with her. He had lost the fight. She could feel that he had lost it, could feel the door standing open. In him now could feel the winter beginning to gather itself in answer. And she had fire in her hands, and no idea how to use it. And a coven somewhere in the dark, growing stronger off every frozen Halden heart, and her old life marching toward the gates with 50 spears and a wounded pride and a knock. Sharp, urgent, wrong. Alpha, a warrior's voice through the door, breathless. Riders at the border, they fly the Highmoor banner. Corvin was already moving, already pulling on the discipline of an alpha at war. How many? 50. And Alpha. A pause. The man swallowing Garrick Vale rides at their head. He's brought himself. How is here? Already. Not a message, not a threat, not a distant war, to prepare for here now tonight, come in person to drag her back to the hall she'd walked out of. The knowledge went through Aveline like cold water. Corvin turned to her, and his face had closed over into iron, and the frost had stopped spreading on the window, because he had with visible effort gathered every scrap of the cold back into himself where it couldn't hurt her. Stay here, he said. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or my aunt, not the guards, not Linnea, not anyone. Corvin, promise me. And there it was, in his voice the fear he was trying so hard to bury under the authority. Not fear for himself, fear for her. Please, just this once don't be brave. Promise me you'll stay behind this door. The please undid her. I promise, she said. And he was gone out the door and down the corridor with the frost trailing off his shoulders like smoke, and Aveline stood alone in her chamber, with her heart slamming against her ribs, and the taste of a lie already turning in her mouth. Because she had promised. And she already knew she wasn't going to keep it. She lasted by her own count the length of about 100 heartbeats. She stood behind the locked door with her back against the cold wood, and she told herself all the sensible things. That she'd promised. That Corvin knew war, and she did not. That the smartest, safest thing she could do was exactly what he'd asked. Stay put. Stay hidden. Let the men handle the men. Except she had spent 22 years letting the men handle the men. She had let them handle her whole life. Let her father arrange her. Let Garrick assume her. Let 1,000 people decide her worth in a hall full of candles while she stood in white and waited to be chosen. And every single time she had stayed behind the door where it was safe. She had come out to find her life a little smaller, her voice a little quieter, her fire, her actual fire, she understood now, banked a little lower. She was done staying behind doors. More than that, she needed to see it. She needed to stand somewhere Garrick Vale could see her, and understand from her own face that she was not stolen, not a victim, not a thing to be reclaimed. That she had walked out of his hall by choice and would not be walking back. She needed him to see that she was not coming home. Aveline unlocked the door. She dressed fast, no white, never white, a dark cloak over dark wool, and she slipped out into the corridor and moved through the sleeping castle toward the sound of raised voices gathering at the front gates. She knew these halls now. 3 weeks had made them hers in a way 22 years at Highmoor never had. She found the servants' stair and the gallery above the main courtyard, and a stone balcony that looked down over the gates, and she pressed herself to the cold rail and looked down at the thing she had run from. The courtyard below was full of torchlight and breath fog and the low growl of 2 packs deciding whether to bleed. Garrick stood at the head of his 50, magnificent in golden armor, autumn eyes blazing with a righteousness he had not earned. He looked every inch the hero come to rescue his stolen bride. It made her want to be sick. Corvin stood on the castle steps. His own wolves ranged behind him in silence, and the cold was pouring off him now. In a way she could see frost creeping out across the stones beneath his boots, spreading in slow white veins toward the invaders. "You've made an act of war, Halden." Garrick's voice carried across the courtyard, ringing off the black walls. "You stole a woman of my pack, forced a bond on her against her will. I've come to bring her home." "Stolen." Corvin's voice was soft and terrible, and it silenced the courtyard more completely than any shout. "She came to me. She chose me in her own words with her own 2 hands in a courtyard you'd just thrown her out of. The only who forced her to do anything was you, when you humiliated her in front of everyone she'd ever known and expected her to smile through it. She was confused, hurt. She didn't know what she was doing. She knew exactly what she was doing." Corvin descended a single step and several of Garrick's warriors shifted backward, without meaning to. "She has known exactly what she was doing every moment since. Which is more than I can say for the man who threw away the best thing that ever stood in his hall, and only wanted it back, once someone else had picked it up." Garrick's jaw worked. "She's mine by right. Promised to me since before she could walk. Her bond to you is a lie. Her bond to me is sealed and witnessed. She bears my mark. I bear hers. There is nothing false about it, and you know there isn't, or you'd have brought judges instead of spears." Up on the balcony, Aveline's hands tightened on the cold rail, because she was watching. Garrick's face. Really watching it in the torchlight, and what she saw, there was not love, and not even genuine concern. It was wounded pride, raw and ugly. A boy who'd broken his own toy and flown into a rage the moment another child picked it up out of the dirt. He didn't want her. He wanted to not have lost her. There was a world of difference, and standing above it in the cold dark, she finally saw it whole. But there was something else in his face, too. Something underneath the pride. Something that flickered wrong. His eyes, when the torchlight caught them full, they had a sheen to them. A pale, faint gleam there, and gone, like light off ice. And when he spoke, certain words came out with a strange overemphasis, as if someone else were leaning on them from behind, pressing them harder than a man would press his own. Aveline had spent 3 weeks learning to feel the shape of a curse through a bond. She had spent an afternoon reading about magic that leaned on the minds of men and pressed them where it wanted them to go. And looking down at Garrick Vale in his golden armor, mad with a pride too hot even for him, she felt the first cold finger of a suspicion she could not yet name. He was not entirely himself. How was still Garrick, still vain, still cruel, still the boy who'd let her walk into the cold. That was his. That was all his, and no magic had put it there. His, and no magic had put it there. Whatever was riding him hadn't created his pride. It had only fed it, fanned it, taken a flame that was already burning and made it a fire. Someone, she thought, watching the strange gleam surface and sink in her old love's eyes. Someone lit him up and pointed him at this valley. And it is the same someone who has been feeding a curse for 200 years. And I'm looking at their handiwork, and I still cannot see their face. Then Garrick lifted his voice and called out her name across the courtyard into the dark, certain she could hear him. "Aveline, I know you can hear me. Come out. Come down here and tell them all this was a mistake. Tell them you want to come home." And every wolf in that courtyard went still. And Corvin's head turned just slightly up toward the gallery, where she stood hidden, because he could feel her there through the bond. Of course he could. He had felt her leave the moment she unlocked the door, and the look on his face was not anger. It was terror. "Stay hidden," his eyes begged her across the cold air. "You promised me. Please." Aveline looked down at Garrick, gleaming and mad, and calling her home like she was a hound that had slipped its leash. and she stepped out of the shadow to the front of the balcony, into the full red light of every torch in the courtyard, where every wolf of both packs could see her plain. Garrick's face lit up with triumph. There you are. Come down. We're leaving." No. The single word dropped into the courtyard and did not echo, because there was nothing in that silence for it to echo against. "No," Aveline said again, louder, her voice ringing off the black stone of the home she had chosen. "I'm not stolen, Garrick. I'm not confused. I walked out of your hall with my head up, and I have never once looked back, and the only mistake in this whole courtyard is the one you made when you put another woman's collar on and expected me to wait quietly for the scraps." 50 warriors and 100 more watched the discarded bride of Highmore stare down her old alpha from the walls of his enemy's castle. "Go home," she told him. "There's nothing here that belongs to you. There never was. I just took too long to know it." Garrick's triumph curdled into something dark, and his mouth opened, and Aveline saw the cruelty gathering behind his teeth. And she braced for it. And down on the steps, she felt Corvin brace for it, too felt the cold gather in him like a held breath. Whatever Garrick said next was going to break something. She could feel it coming the way you feel a storm on your skin before the first drop falls. The cruelty came exactly the way she knew it would. So this is what it comes to. Garrick's voice climbed the black walls pitched for the whole courtyard to hear. "The faithful little Voss girl runs to my enemy's bed the moment I bruise her pride. Tell me, Aveline, did you go to him the first night? Or did you make him wait a whole day for the privilege?" The words landed like a slap, and she flinched. She couldn't help it. Some old part of her, the part that had stood in white and waited to be chosen, still knew how to be wounded by him. But she gripped the cold rail, and she did not look away, because she had promised herself in that first courtyard that she would never again let a man see her beg. She did not get the chance to answer, because the temperature in the courtyard dropped so fast that the breath fog of 100 wolves crackled into ice and fell glittering to the stones. Corvin moved. She had seen him move before. She had not seen this. One moment he stood on the steps, and the next he was simply there, across 30 feet of open ground, and his hand was closed around Garrick Vale's throat, and he had lifted the golden alpha clean off his feet, as though he weighed nothing at all. "Says it again." Corvin's voice was barely a voice anymore. Something older. Something that lived under lake ice and had never wanted to come up. "Speak about her that way one more time. I dare you." Frost was climbing Garrick's armor, racing up the gold, blooming white across his gorget, crawling toward the exposed skin of his throat, where Corvin's cold hand gripped him. Garrick's autumn eyes went wide. His fine color drained to gray, then faintly, terribly blue. His warriors surged forward and stopped all 50 of them, because the cold, rolling off their enemy's alpha, was a wall no wolf alive wanted to walk into. He was going to kill him. Aveline saw it whole. She saw that Corvin had stopped choosing that the man had gone somewhere the winter had taken over. That in 3 more heartbeats, Garrick Vale would be a frozen thing on the stones, and there would be war between the packs, until the last wolf on either side lay dead in the snow. And she was already running. Down from the balcony, down the servant's stair, 2 steps at a time, out through the side door, into the killing cold of the courtyard, shoving between wolves who were too transfixed by the horror to stop her. She reached them. She grabbed Corvin's arm with both hands. The cold of him burned her palms. Burned like fire burns, that same white shock of too much, and she did not let go. "Corvin, stop." She put herself as close to him as the frost would let her. "Look at me. Not him. Me. He did not look at her. The silver of his eyes was bleeding to white, the winter climbing up from inside him, toward the light, and Garrick was making a thin sound now that was not quite a scream. "He insulted you," Corvin said from very far away. "I don't care." She pressed closer, ignoring the ice searing her hands. "Do you hear me? I don't care what he says. He has no power over me. He hasn't had power over me since the night he handed it to you in a courtyard and called it a curse." Her voice cracked and steadied. "But if you kill him, you start the war. Your people die. My sister is in this castle. Whoever's been feeding on your family for 200 years is out there right now, waiting for exactly this, for you to lose control and hand them a war. Don't give it to them, Corvin. Don't give them one more Halden heart." Something in that reached him. She felt it move through the bond, the white receding the winter, drawing back down into wherever it lived, the man surfacing again in the wreckage of the animal. The frost on Garrick's armor stopped spreading, began very slightly to slick and drip. Corvin opened his hand. Garrick dropped to the stones like a sack of grain, gasping, clutching at a throat gone gray with frostbite. His golden armor rhymed white. His warriors caught him before he fell, fully hauling him up between them. "Take your alpha and go," Corvin said. His voice had come back to something human, but only just. "If any wolf of Highmoor sets foot in this valley again, there will be no second warning. There will be no warning at all." Garrick staggered up between his men, and his frost-burned eyes found Aveline's across the cold, and what she saw in them chilled her worse than any winter Corvin could make. "This isn't finished," he rasped through his ruined throat. "You'll regret this. Both of you will. You have no idea what's coming." And the strange gleam surfaced in his eyes again as he said it. That pale sheen there and gone. And Aveline understood that the threat had not entirely been his. That something had leaned on those words, too. That whoever was hiding Garrick Vale had just spoken through him on purpose to be heard. His warriors dragged him toward the gate. Within minutes, the whole Highmoor column was retreating into the dark torches, shrinking down the valley road. Aveline's knees went loose with relief. Then she turned to Corvin, and the relief died in her throat. Because the ice was not gone. It was on the stones, still yes, but it was also on him. Climbing his own skin now the way it had climbed Garrick's armor, crawling up his arms in veins of living frost, spreading across the backs of his hands, reaching for his chest. "Corvin." She caught his face in her burned hands. "Corvin, look at me." "What's happening?" He looked down at his own arms, and for one instant she saw raw fear cross his face before he could hide it. "I lost control," he said quietly. "I let myself feel too much. The fury, He stopped. His silver eyes lifted to hers, and the fear in them was not for himself. "The other thing, the one we don't say. I let the door open, Aveline, all the way. And now the cold has nowhere to go but in." "What does that mean?" Her voice was climbing. "Corvin, what does that mean?" He didn't answer. His knees buckled. She caught him before he hit the stones, barely going down under his weight, cradling his head in her lap in the middle of the frozen courtyard, with 100 wolves staring, and her sister screaming her name somewhere behind her, and the cold pouring off him now, like breath off a lake in winter. "Stay with me." The words tore out of her. "Corvin, stay. You don't get to do this. You promised me a whole year, do you hear me? You promised me a door I could walk through. You don't get to leave before." His eyes found hers, the silver already fading toward gray. "I'm sorry," he breathed. "I tried to warn you." and his eyes closed, and he went limp and terribly cold in her arms, and the frost on his skin did not stop climbing. 3 days. 3 days of Corvin lying motionless in his chambers, while the winter he'd swallowed ate him from the inside. It had started at his hands, where the cold first broke free. Now it covered his chest. It crept up his throat. It spread across his cheeks in pale patterns, like frozen tears, and his skin had gone translucent, the veins beneath it. Blue, and his breath came so shallow and so slow that twice Aveline pressed her ear to his chest, certain it had stopped, and heard the faint, slow drum of a heart that could not decide whether to keep going. She did not leave his side. Nerys tried to make her eat. She would not. Linnea tried to make her sleep. She would not. She sat by the great cold bed, hour after hour, holding his frozen hand in both of hers, talking to him, even though he could not hear, because if she stopped talking, she would have to hear the silence, and the silence sounded like a man dying. "You haven't shown me the hot springs yet," she told him on the second morning. "In the mountains. You said there were hot springs where the snow never settles, and you'd take me when the passes cleared. You can't break a promise to your Luna. It's very bad form." No answer. There was never any answer. Through the bond, she could still feel him. Barely. A distant flicker where there had once been a steady, patient cold flame, like a candle in a far window, guttering the dark, pressing in on all sides. "I won't let you go," she whispered on the third morning, her forehead against his frozen knuckles. "Do you hear me? I won't." The healers have done everything they know. Aveline looked up. Nerys stood in the doorway, and grief had aged her 10 years in 3 days. "Then we find someone who knows more." "There is no one." Nerys came into the room slowly, the way you approach something already mourned. "The curse is ancient, and it is complete. Every Haldan Alpha before him either stayed cold and untouched his whole life, or came to this. There has never been a third road." "There has to be something." Aveline's voice cracked. "Nerys, there has to be something." The older woman was quiet a long time. When she finally spoke, it was so soft, Aveline almost missed it. "Fire." "What?" "The only thing in any of the old books that could break a winter curse of this size." Nerys's eyes were fixed on her nephew's frozen face. "Fire magic. Real fire magic, not a spark, not a knack, but the true old flame of a power, equal to or greater than the winter set against it." She shook her head slowly. "But the fire witches were hunted to the last child. 2-3 generations ago. The purging. The few who lived went so deep into hiding that we've never found even a rumor of one. There is no fire witch left in the northern territories to save him. There hasn't been in 50 years. Fire. The word went through Aveline like a struck bell, because she had stood in a scorched corridor 3 weeks ago, with a wall of gold flame pouring from her open hand. Because there was a curtain in a chamber at High Moor that she had blackened with her temper and blamed on a candle. Because candles leaned toward her and hearths flared when she walked in cold, and her palms had never once burned no matter how the fire poured through them. Because her mother, Elira dead these many years, used to sit on the edge of her childhood bed and tell her stories in the dark. A woman with flame-colored hair. A woman who made flowers bloom in the deep of winter. A great-aunt. A great-great-grandmother. Someone far back, and half-remembered a fairy tale. Aveline had always thought a bedtime story to send a child to sleep. She had thought they were stories. They had never been stories. "Nerys," she said, and her voice did not sound like her own. What was my mother's name before she married? Nerys turned from the bed. What? My mother? Her name? Before she was a Voss. It was... Aveline's mind raced back through a childhood of half-heard things. Ashcombe. Elira Ashcombe. Why does that Nerys? Why are you looking at me like that? The color had drained from Nerys's face. The Ashcombe line, she breathed. The last known Fire Witch bloodline in the north. They were said to have been wiped out entirely in the purging. Her sharp eyes were very bright now. But there were always rumors that some survived, that they hid what they were. Married into wolf packs, buried the flame so deep that even their own children never knew they carried it, passed it down in secret sleeping, waiting. She crossed the room in 3 strides and took Aveline by the shoulders. Think. Her grip was iron. In your whole life, has anything ever happened you couldn't explain? Fires that started with no cause. Heat that came when your temper broke. Candles that... The corridor, Aveline whispered. 3 weeks ago, Halvard came for Linnea and I. She looked down at her own hands, at the palms that should have burned to the bone in the courtyard 3 days ago, holding Corvin's freezing arm, and had not even reddened. I put up a wall of fire. It came out of my hands, Nerys. I've never told anyone. I didn't understand it. But it was gold, and it didn't burn me, and... You have it. Nerys's voice shook with something that was almost hope and almost terror. You have the fire. It's been dormant your whole life, suppressed so deep you never knew. But it woke, didn't it? For your sister. The magic answers to feeling child. It answered to love. But I don't know how to use it. Aveline's eyes went to Corvin, frozen and fading in the great bed. That was instinct. Terror. I didn't do it. It just happened. I don't know how to call it. I don't know how to control it. I'd kill him. Nerys, I could pour it into him wrong and burn away whatever's left. You don't need to know how. Nerys pulled her toward the bed, toward the frozen man, toward the guttering candle at the far edge of the bond. You need to feel. That's the only rule the flame has ever had. It answered to love once. Give it enough love, and it will answer again. Her voice dropped. You're his mate. The bond is your bridge. Reach across it. Take everything you feel for him. Everything you've been too afraid to name these 3 weeks, holding the door shut from your side, and stop holding it shut, let it burn. Aveline looked down at Corvin, at the frost feathered across his beautiful ruined face, at the blue of his lips, at the man who had promised her nothing and given her the one thing no one else ever had the freedom to choose herself. And she felt something ignite in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. Tell me what to do, she said. Put your hands on his heart, and then for once in your careful life, don't hold anything back. Aveline climbed onto the great bed and knelt over him, and she laid both palms flat against his chest over the slow, failing, frozen drum of his heart. And she reached for the bond. It was so faint. Fainter than she'd feared, a thread nearly frozen through a candle, nearly drowned the connection between them, stretched to breaking across a widening dark. She grasped for it with everything in her, and for one terrible moment she thought she had come too late, that the flame at the far end had already gone out. Then she felt him. Barely. A flicker. And she opened the door. She opened it all the way. The door she had been holding shut for 3 weeks, loving him by refusing to standing on her own side of it, while he stood on his. She stopped refusing. She let it all come through at once, the whole flood of it, and it poured down her arms and into her hands, and toward his frozen heart. I love you, she said aloud, and the words broke out of her like a river through a dam. I love you, Corvin Holden. I didn't mean to. I fought it every single night, but I do. Heat bloomed under her palms. I love the way you protect everyone but yourself. I love that you knocked on your own door and waited for me to answer every night when you never had to. I love that the first time you touched me, you were shaking and you asked me if I was sure, and no one in 22 years had ever once asked me if I was sure. The heat spread down her arms into her hands, gold beginning to glow beneath her skin. I love that you're terrified of what you carry, and it never once made you cruel. I love that you let me in anyway, even knowing what it would cost you. You let me choose you back. Her hands began to shine, light spilling out from between her fingers, pooling on his frozen chest. So you don't get to die. The tears came now, hot down her cold face, falling and steaming where they struck his skin. You hear me? You don't get to leave. Not after everything. Not when I have finally found the one place in the whole world where I am seen exactly as I am. And it's here. It's this cold, impossible valley. It's you. So you are going to open your eyes, Corvin, because I did not walk through fire to get here, just to bury you. The fire erupted. It poured out of her hands into his chest, brilliant and gold, and it was nothing like the cold blue flame she'd braced for. It was warm. Pure warmth. Pure life. The sun poured molten through her palms and into the frozen man beneath her. The ice hissed, cracked, steam rose off him in white sheets as 200 years of winter met something older and hotter than any curse. Aveline screamed as the power tore through her, more than the corridor, more than she'd known. She held more than she knew how to survive. It scoured her from the inside. It threatened to take her with it, to burn her hollow, and leave nothing but ash on the furs she did not let go. She held on with everything she was pouring, her whole opened heart down through her hands. And she watched the frost retreat from his face. She watched the blue leave his lips. She watched color, real color, living warmth, flood back into skin that had been translucent as river ice. His chest heaved. He drew a breath, a great, ragged, tearing gasp, the breath of a man, surfacing from deep underwater, and his eyes flew open. Silver met gold. His pale eyes clear and alive, locking onto hers, where they blazed above him full of fire. Aveline. His voice was a wreck, broken, alive. I'm here. She collapsed against his chest as the fire guttered out, and her strength went with it. I'm here. I've got you. His arms came around her, and they were warm, not cold, not frozen. Warm like any other man, like any wolf who'd ever held a woman in the dark. She felt it, and she laughed a cracked and weeping sound, pressing her wet face to a throat that no longer ran with snowmelt. What did you do? He whispered into her hair. I think I broke your curse. She laughed again, helpless, exhausted, alive. I'm apparently a fire witch, surprise. He pulled back to look at her, and the wonder on his face was something she would keep for the rest of her life. You're a fire witch, he repeated. Dormant, hidden, my whole life, until I needed it. She pressed her forehead to his. You really did pick wrong, you know. You wanted the one woman who could never touch you. You got the only one alive who could burn straight through. A laugh escaped him, rusty, disused like a hinge that hadn't turned in years, but real. I picked wrong, he agreed. Warm hand, rising to cradle her face. I have never in my life been so glad to be wrong. And he kissed her, and his mouth was warm, and the whole cold winter that had lived in him for 30 years had finally thawed. It should have been the end. Aveline would think that later, that in a fairer world, that would have been the end. The curse broken, the winter thawed, the two of them warm at last in a bed that no longer wore its skin of frost. But Nerys was still standing at the foot of the bed, and Nerys was not smiling. "The curse is broken on him," she said quietly into the warm ruin of the moment. "But someone laid it on this family in the first place. Someone has fed it for 200 years. And winter magic of that size does not simply let go of what it's been drinking." Her eyes were grave. "They will feel it break, child, the way you feel a rope snap in your hands. And they are going to come to see who cut it." Aveline pulled back from Corvin, cold understanding trickling in past the joy. "What are you saying?" She never got the answer, because a servant burst through the chamber door, white-faced and gasping, and the words fell out of him in a rush. "My lady, there's a woman at the gates. An army with her. Women in robes, dozens of them, and the cold coming off them you can see from the walls." He swallowed. "She's demanding to see the Luna. She says her name is Morwenna Sael, and she says you'll know exactly who she is." The floor seemed to drop from beneath her. Morwenna. The woman in the wound-red gown. The woman who'd taken Aveline's place at the Highmoor, claiming with a small, private, satisfied smile. The woman Garrick had chosen, the woman Aveline had looked past 100 times because she'd been too busy guarding the wrong door. And now, here at Blackthorn's gates with an army of witches and the cold pouring off her. "Oh," Aveline breathed as 100 small pieces she'd been carrying for 3 weeks slid together at last into one terrible whole. "Oh, it was you. It was you the entire time." The army at the gate was like nothing Aveline had ever seen. Women in robes of ice blue and silver stood in perfect silent formation across the frozen valley floor, their hands crackling with winter light, their breath not fogging at all because there was no warmth in them left to fog. And at their head, resplendent in a gown of what looked like frozen silk, stood Morwenna Sael. She was not the demure noblewoman of the Highmoor court anymore. That had been a costume, and she had shed it. Her golden hair was threaded through now with veins of white. Her eyes glowed with a pale blue light that was not human and had perhaps never been. Power came off her in slow waves that turned the falling snow to hanging ice. Aveline stood on the battlements with Corvin at her side. He had insisted on rising on standing with her, though he was hours out of a coma and pale with the effort, and she had not had the heart or the will to make him stay behind. Nerys stood at her other shoulder. Below and behind them, the wolves of Blackthorn ranged along the walls in grim silence. "A little wolf," Morwenna called up, and her voice carried unnaturally across the distance, sliding under the skin. "Come out and face me. We have so much to discuss. 200 years of it." "Who are you, really?" Aveline's voice was steady. She had run out of the capacity to be surprised. "Not the Western Lord's daughter. That was never you." Morwenna smiled, and there was nothing human in it at all. "I am the Keeper of the Frost, High Priestess of the Winter Coven." Her glowing eyes moved to Corvin, and her smile widened. "My foremothers laid the curse on the Halden line 200 years ago, little Alpha. And you were never ever meant to break it." "Why?" Corvin said. His voice was thin, but it did not waver. "Why my family? Why any of it?" "Because your grandmother stole from us." Old hatred twisted across Morwenna's frozen features. The heart of winter, an artifact of true power. She took it, and she used it to bind herself into your pack, to hide among the wolves. When your people found her out and killed her, the heart was lost with her. We have hunted it ever since." Her voice cooled further. "And the curse insurance, and punishment. Every Halden Alpha who dared to feel love would freeze, and every frozen heart would feed us, and we would grow strong on your family's grief for as long as your line lasted. It was a perfect arrangement." Her glowing eyes swung back to Aveline. "Until you. Miss a fire witch, hidden in plain sight among the wolves, the very last daughter of the very last Ashcombe line." Morwenna's face contorted. "We should have found your mother and killed her when we had the chance. But she hid you so well, buried your flame so deep. We never dreamed the power would wake in the daughter. And here it came, the last piece, the one Aveline had felt the shape of on the balcony 3 nights ago and had not been able to name. You knew about my mother," she said slowly. "We knew Ashcombe blood survived somewhere. We've hunted it for decades." Morwenna's smile turned to something almost fond, which was worse than any snarl. "Imagine my delight when I traced the last Ashcombe daughter to the court of Highmoor, betrothed of all things to an alpha. Such a gift. I simply had to make sure you never bonded with anyone who might wake what slept in you. So you took Garrick. So I encouraged him." The correction came with relish. "That's the part you've been getting wrong, little wolf, and I can see it eating you. I didn't make Garrick Vale do anything. I'm not a puppeteer, men are not puppets. More's the pity, they'd be so much easier if they were." Her laugh was a cold and awful thing. "No, Garrick's pride was already there. His ambition, his vanity, his hunger for a grander match than the dead Beta's daughter. He'd been saddled with since childhood, all of it his own. I merely found the flame already burning in him. And I fed it. I fanned it. I whispered under the whispers already in his head, until the thing he half wanted became the thing he had to have." Her glowing eyes gleamed. "He chose me of his own free will, Aveline. I only made certain his own worst self was loud enough to drown out his better one. He threw you away with his own hands. I just made his hands a little quicker." Aveline absorbed that. And here was the strange thing, the thing she would turn over for a long time afterward. It should have made her hate Garrick more to learn that his cruelty had been his own. Instead, it settled something in her, because a man who could be forced to discard her was a tragedy. A man who chose to, and only needed a little help to hurry, that was just a weak man being weak, and there was nothing in it worth breaking her heart over. There never had been. "You've been feeding on his family," Aveline said, nodding toward Corvin, "for 200 years. My mother before me, her mother before her." Morwenna spread her frozen hands. "The Halden line has sustained our coven for 6 generations, and you have just severed that connection. Do you have any idea, little wolf, how much power you've cost me tonight?" Aveline stepped forward to the very edge of the battlement, and flame flickered to life around her hands. Not instinct. This time, not terror, but summoned. Called, answered. She had reached for it on purpose, and it had come, and the sight of it wiped the smile clean off Morwenna's face. "Good," Aveline said. "Consider it the first payment on a very old debt you have taken from this family for 200 years. You took a girl when he was 15. You took my mother's whole life and made her spend it hiding in fear. You took my place at that claiming, and you enjoyed it." The fire brightened around her fists. "I'm done letting you take. Come up here and try it to my face." Morwenna's eyes narrowed to slits of blue light. "You think your untrained little spark can stand against 200 years of winter," she said. "Against an entire coven. You've had your power for 3 weeks, child. I've had mine for 300 years. I think, Aveline said, you should have killed my mother when you had the chance. Corvin's hand closed around her arm. You're barely healed. You can't fight all of them. I'm not going to fight all of them. She turned and met his silver eyes, and for a moment, there was no army, no coven, no cold. Only the two of them. I'm going to fight her. The curse was tied to her power. Every witch down there is drawing from the same well she is. If I put out the well, that's a theory, not a certainty. It's the only one we have. Across the bond, she felt his fear sharp and total, his desperate need to shield her, to put himself between her and the winter one more time. But under it, she felt something else. Trust. Faith. The belief that she could do this thing, laid down beside the terror like a hand over a hand. Then we fight together, he said. The curse is broken. My cold is gone, but I'm still an alpha. I can still tear out a throat the old-fashioned way. A ghost of his old winter smile touched his mouth. It's been a while. I'm owed. Despite everything, Aveline laughed. Then she turned back to the frozen priestess at her gates, and she called down to her own guards. Open them. The gates of Blackthorn groaned wide, and Aveline Voss walked out to meet the woman who had unmade her life with fire in her hands, and a warm wolf at her side. The coven parted as they came folding back into a wide ring until Aveline and Corvin stood at the center of a circle of winter witches, with Morwenna waiting at its heart, power crackling around her like a gathering storm. You could have lived, Morwenna said almost gently, if you'd simply stayed in your little corner of High Moor, been an obedient, forgotten thing, grown old wondering why no man ever quite loved you. None of this would have been necessary. I was never very good at obedient, Aveline said, and she struck first. Fire erupted from her palms in a blazing arc, and Morwenna threw up a wall of ice to meet it, and the two elements crashed together in a roar of steam and a shriek of tortured air that knocked the nearest witches from their feet. The battle that followed was chaos. Aveline fought on pure instinct, the way she'd fought in the corridor, channeling everything she felt into the flame. Love for Corvin, hot and total. Grief for the mother who had spent her whole life afraid. Fury for the girl who died when Corvin was 15, and for every Haldenhart these women had drunk down for 200 years. The fire answered every feeling. It grew. It brightened. It roared. But Morwenna had 3 centuries of discipline, and Aveline had 3 weeks. The priestess moved through her spell work with the ease of long practice, and where Aveline's fire was wild and vast and untrained, Morwenna's ice was precise and patient and cruel. She sent shards of it screaming through the air. She sent gusts of killing frost. Twice only Corvin saved her. Corvin gone to his wolf now, a great dark shape tearing through the coven's constructs, throwing himself between his mate and the ice again and again, buying her the second she needed with his own body. You can't win. Morwenna snarled blood on her cheek, where Corvin's claws had caught her. Your fire is strong, but it's wild, undisciplined. You'll burn yourself hollow before you burn through me. And she was right. Aveline could feel it, her strength, guttering her flames, flickering the well of her running dry. She had poured half of everything she had into saving Corvin 3 days ago and never fully recovered, and now the rest was pouring out onto the frozen valley floor, and Morwenna had centuries in reserve. Corvin, she gasped. I don't have enough. I'm burning out. His voice came into her mind through the bond, warm now, no longer winter. Use the bond. Take from me. Everything I have. Take it. It might hurt you. Take it." And Aveline reached across the thread that bound them, the bond that had reached past her, once in a hall full of candles, and left her holding nothing, and she took his strength, his warmth. The whole vast furnace of an alpha's power, given freely, poured across the bond and into her. But more than that, she took what was under it. His love, fierce and unguarded and total. His faith in her. His willingness to hand her everything he was and keep nothing back. And the fire roared back to life. It came up in her, brighter than before, brighter than the corridor, brighter than the frozen bed, a gold so pure it turned the falling snow to light. Morwenna's eyes went wide. What? Aveline didn't give her the time. She gathered all of it, every feeling, every borrowed scrap of Corvin's warmth, 3 weeks of love, and 22 years of banked fire, and 200 years of another family's stolen grief, and she poured it into a single blazing point, and she let it go. The fire struck Morwenna full in the chest. The Keeper of the Frost screamed as the flame took her. Not the scream of a woman, but the shriek of 200 years of hoarded winter, meeting something that finally would not yield to it. The fire burned through her stolen centuries in an instant, and behind her, all across the valley, the witches of her coven cried out as one as the well they'd all been drinking from and suddenly catastrophically dry. Their ice failed. Their light guttered. The power that had bound them together for 6 generations snapped like a frozen rope. When the flames died, there was nothing left of Morwenna Sael but ash scattering across the snow. Aveline dropped. Her strength spent to the last drop, she crumpled, and Corvin back in his skin caught her before she struck the ground. "Is it over?" she whispered. "It's over." He pressed his warm lips to her forehead, and she felt the warmth of him, and nearly wept from it. "You did it. You ended it. 200 years, Aveline. And you ended it. In one night." Around them, the surviving witches were fleeing their leader, gone, their power broken, their long harvest over. The wolves of Blackthorn poured from the gates to secure the retreat, but there was no pursuit. There was no need. The thing that had haunted this valley for 6 generations had blown away on the wind as a handful of ash. Aveline closed her eyes and let herself sink into the warm arms of the man she'd chosen in a cold courtyard, and for the first time in her whole life, she felt entirely, completely safe. She slept for 2 days. When she woke, Corvin was in the chair beside the bed, exactly where he had been when she lost consciousness, and the sight of him, warm, alive, whole, was the best thing she had ever opened her eyes to. "You look terrible," she croaked. "You should see the priestess." His smile was tired and utterly real. She learned over the slow days of her recovery, the shape of what she'd done. The curse was not merely broken on Corvin. It was gone root and branch, severed from the whole Halden line for good. Whatever children came after him would carry no winter in their blood. The cold that had haunted 6 generations had ended in a single night on a valley floor, and it would never come again. But that was not the part Aveline chose to build her new life around. Because she had learned something else in that battle. She had learned what she was. The Ashcombe line had not ended. It ran in her awake now, and it would run in whoever came after her, and she refused to let it sleep again, the way her mother had been forced to let it sleep. Nerys found what remained of the old Ashcombe texts smuggled out of the purging generations. Ago hidden in the deep archives of 3 different packs gathered now, for the first time in 50 years. and Aveline studied them the way she'd once studied the blackthorn ledgers. Hungrily, determined to master in the open the thing her mother had been made to bury in fear. She learned to calm the flame and to let it go. She learned to warm a cold room with a thought and to leave it untouched. She learned slowly that the fire had never been a danger to be feared, but a gift to be tended, and that the difference between the two was only ever love and control and the courage to stop hiding. And she did one thing more which surprised even her. Garrick Vale came to Blackthorn on a gray morning at the turn of the season, and this time he came alone. He came without armor, without warriors, without the strange pale gleam in his eyes, because the thing that had ridden him blew away with Morwenna's ash and left behind only a man, a diminished frost-scarred man whose throat still bore the white marks of the winter that had nearly killed him, and whose pack word had it no longer entirely trusted the Alpha, who'd nearly dragged them into a war over wounded pride. He asked to see the Luna. Aveline received him in the great hall on the dais, with Corvin at her side, and her fire burning warm in the iron braziers along the walls. She watched him cross the black stone floor, and she waited to feel the old wound reopen, and it did not. "I've come to apologize," Garrick said. His ruined voice was quiet, small, for all of it. The claiming, the courtyard, the things I said at your gates. He swallowed against his scarred throat. "I want to tell you I wasn't myself, that she made me do it, and part of that's true. There was something in my head, pushing." "But," Aveline said, "but it was pushing me toward a door I'd already opened." He met her eyes, and to his small credit, he did not look away. "She didn't put the ambition in me, Aveline. It was mine. She just made it louder. The truth is, I wanted the grander match. I told myself you'd understand. I let myself throw you away because a part of me wanted to, and I have spent every day since learning exactly what that part of me was worth." He bowed his head. "It was worth nothing. I was worth nothing, and I'm sorry." The hall was very quiet. Here was the moment. Aveline knew it, the way she'd known the cruelty was coming on the balcony. This was the place where the old stories reached for the sword, where the wronged woman standing in power, at last, gets to watch the man who ruined her grovel and takes from it whatever grim satisfaction such things provide. And she felt the pull of it. She would not pretend she didn't. Some small wounded animal in her wanted to call up the fire and let him see a dance, wanted to make him afraid the way she'd been afraid, wanted to send him crawling back to his crumbling pack with a story that would follow him the rest of his days. Except she had watched Corvin nearly kill this man in a courtyard, and she had seen where that road led to war, to 100 more frozen hearts, to the exact cycle that had been feeding this valley to a coven for 2 centuries. Cruelty had a well too, she understood now, and it had to be fed the same way, grievance handed down to grievance generation to generation, until nobody could remember who'd struck the first blow, and everybody was still bleeding for it. She was so tired of the digging. She'd told Brannock that 3 weeks and a lifetime ago. "I'm ready to stop digging." So she did not reach for the sword. "I forgive you," Aveline said. Garrick's head came up startled. "Not because you deserve it." Her voice was clear, and it carried to every corner of that hall. "You don't. You made your choice with your own hands, and you'll live the rest of your life inside the size of it. And that's a heavier sentence than anything I could hand you. I forgive you, because I refuse to carry you 1 more mile. Hate is a weight. Garrick and I have walked far enough with your weight on my back. I'm setting it down. Here, now. Not for your sake, for mine." She stood. "Go home." Do better than you did with me, for whatever wolf is unlucky enough to stand where I stood. And know that the war between our packs is over, not because either of us won it, but because I decided standing here that it would end with me." She let the smallest warmth into her voice. "Somebody has to be the one who stops digging. It might as well be the daughter of a beta. My father would have liked that, I think." Garrick stared at her for a long moment. Then he bowed a real bow, low, and unfeigned the bow of a man to a woman who had become something far larger than the girl he'd thrown away. And he turned and left the hall, and the great doors closed behind him, and Aveline Voss felt the very last of it lift off her shoulders and drift away like ash on the wind. They held the treaty signing at the turn of the following year. Not a wedding Aveline had had enough of ceremonies where a woman stands and waits to be chosen. This was something she built with her own hands. Wolves of Highmoor and Blackthorn gathered in the great hall of the valley that had been a fortress of war for 3 generations, and they put their names to a peace that Aveline herself had spent the year negotiating, riding between the packs, sitting at both tables, translating 3 generations of grief into something 2 peoples could finally lay down together. She had become, without ever quite meaning, to the bridge, the one thing that could stand in both halls. Highmoor blood and Blackthorn bond and Ashcombe fire all in one woman, and no one on either side could deny that it took all 3 to end what had bled them for so long. Linnea stayed. Aveline made her a permanent place at Blackthorn, and in time, even the most suspicious of the pack, even Brannock, who came one evening and gruffly, wordlessly, laid a carved wooden wolf on Aveline's table, and left before she could thank him, came to accept the gentle Voss girl as one of their own. And the fire did not sleep again. Aveline saw to that. She was already gathering the scattered knowledge of the Ashcombe line, already teaching herself what her mother had been forced to hide, already thinking about the children who might someday carry it. How she would not bury it in them, would not make them afraid of themselves, the way 3 generations of Ashcombe daughters had been made afraid. The flame would live in the open now, tended, honored, free. On the first warm evening of true spring, when the last snow had gone from the valley and the hot springs Corvin had promised her steamed gently in the high passes. At last, Aveline stood on the balcony of the chambers they now shared and watched the valley come alive with color, and felt her husband's warm arms come around her from behind. "Do you ever regret it?" Corvin asked quietly against her hair. "Leaving everything behind. Walking out of that courtyard with your enemy, choosing me." Aveline considered the question seriously the way it deserved. She thought of Garrick diminished and scarred slowly, rebuilding a pack that no longer quite trusted him. She thought of the life she would have had as his Luna, always second, always waiting, always guarding a house of reasons for why the man beside her never quite turned to look at her. And then she thought of this, of the warmth at her back, of the partnership they'd built, honest and equal, 2 people who'd promised each other nothing and given each other everything, of the fire in her own 2 hands, awake and free after a lifetime asleep. "I didn't leave everything behind," she said. "I brought the important parts with me. My sister, my mother's memory, my fire which was mine all along. I just never had anything worth burning for." She turned in his arms to face him. "And I didn't choose you, Corvin. Not the way you mean. We chose each other. That night in the courtyard, when you offered me revenge and I took your hand, neither of us had any idea what we were really choosing. We thought it was politics. We thought it was spite. We were fools, Corvin said. Complete fools. She laughed. But we figured it out. Together. And I wouldn't trade a single cold, impossible night of it. He pulled her close, and she felt his warmth wrap around her, like a promise kept. You saved me, he murmured. In every way, a person can be saved. We saved each other, she corrected softly. That's the only kind of saving that ever lasts. And standing there, in the warm spring dark, wrapped in the arms of the man she had chosen. The man she had walked through fire to keep Aveline Voss finally understood what she had spent her whole life getting wrong. She thought a future was a thing you waited for, a thing handed to you like a cup by someone who'd decided you were worthy of it. She had stood in a hall full of candles at 22 and believed her whole life depended on whether one man chose to speak her name. He hadn't spoken it. And it had been the beginning of everything. Because a future was never something you waited to be given. It was something you claimed with your own two hands, with your own stubborn heart, with a fire you'd carried banked and hidden until the night you finally stopped being afraid to let it burn. Nobody had chosen this life for her. She had walked out of the warm gold hall and into the cold black one, and lit the whole thing up herself. And she would go on lighting it. This valley, this peace, this warm impossible love, this flame. Mother had died hiding, and she would raise her children never to fear for the rest of her days. Not because anyone gave her the right to, but because she had finally learned that the right had been hers all along. She just had to stop waiting